My apologies for being a little short in terms of getting videos out for the past month or two or so, or whatever you want to claim the timeline to be, because I've been so busy, and as a result, I haven't been able to do that much testing because, well, there's so many things that have come out, like Final Cut for the iPad that we're going to talk about today. And then I also, speaking of iPads, got the iPad Air. I'm still in the process of formulating the official review of that. But I figured that I need to get back on the 8-ball when it comes to making gadgets videos, and so despite that, I'm currently on vacation. You might notice in terms of the background. I need to get on the 8-ball about finally reviewing and testing these things, because actually I've tested this a while ago and I just haven't actually gotten around to filming the official review of Final Cut on the iPad. So you know what? Let's just do that. Alright, so a while back I made the news discussing that maybe Apple had just saved the iPad Pro because, I mean, come on. Ever since Apple came out with it, we've been begging for them to improve the software upon it. The hardware was great. Ever since 2018, I'd say it's basically perfect at that point. But they just never given it any professional grade software for pro users to work with. I mean, yeah, you take a look at all the Photoshop apps that are available for it, and so you can take advantage of the Apple Pencil. Sorry, it's still not as professional as even the desktop versions of those apps, so I just don't know what to tell you. So we keep complaining year after, it's been like 5 years and we're still complaining to Apple at this point. We want more professional software for the iPad, but they just, for whatever reason, refuse to give it to us. I mean, they deliver iPads now with a freaking M1 chip. The iPad Pros nowadays have an M2 chip in it, but we can't take advantage of it because, like, what was the most powerful software they had available for you other than Final Cut and Logic that we're talking about today? It was basically Swift Playgrounds. Wow. Yeah, that is so professional and power intensive. Pros are absolutely going to love using not even full version of a coding software. I don't understand what Apple's thinking. When they did come out with the announcement of Final Cut Pro for the iPad, I thought, okay, maybe they're going to do it, but I still had my skepticism, as every time they try to bring something that we think is going to be professional to the iPad, they always still continue to nerf it. And I don't understand. They have this fundamental idea where if it runs on the iPad, it has to be nerfed. It can't be as good as the Mac app. And unfortunately, that is the case with Final Cut on the iPad as it is. I have edited this video as well as another video on the Drive channel, and I gotta say, it was not a fun experience because I am a Final Cut user. I use Final Cut to edit these videos, including this very video you're watching. Yes, I edited it with Final Cut on the Mac. It's a very capable and professional tool, and I love this software so much. However, I would think that due to the fact that Apple designed Final Cut for the Mac and the iPad, they should be fairly similar to use and fairly cohesive because, I mean, they're developed by the same people. Well, it turns out, no. I spent way longer editing simpler videos. If I edited these same videos on my Mac, I probably could have gotten it done in less than an hour. These are that simple of videos to edit. But I ended up spending well over 2 hours trying to edit this video alone here on the iPad, and seriously, that was what I could have edited this in somewhere between 45 minutes to an hour if I was doing it on the Mac. Yeah, everything that went into the design of this, it just was not cohesive. So considering it took me an extra hour to edit a simple video on this, I guess that means we got a lot to talk about in terms of how Apple handled some things here. So the first thing that I spent like roughly, I don't know, 5-10 minutes on was trying to figure out how you color correct the footage, because they don't actually make it that simple. What you're supposed to do is tap a clip here, supposedly, then you go to inspect, then you have to hit this info button up here, right? Or wait, no, I don't think it's the info button. Jeez, they've made this so confusing. Where is this? Oh, it's under effects, then you got color adjustments, and then it takes you to this whole menu of different color adjustment things that you can do to it. Except I've discovered a little bit of an issue with these color adjustment tools that Final Cut has to offer on the iPad. It's not using the same units as on the Mac. So because of that, I had to spend much longer trying to color correct my footage instead of inputting the same hard numbers I do for everything, because usually when I input the hard numbers on Final Cut for Mac, it's quite simple. Seriously, my color correction process is go to saturation, global global saturation, enter 1.4, boom, saturated, boosted. And then I go to overall temperature and change it to 4,000 degrees, I think, something like that, just to get rid of the nasty yellow light that my bedroom lights give off all the time. It literally takes me 5 seconds to color correct my footage, but no, I spent about 5 minutes trying to color correct the footage for the iPad. And despite that I even did it on this, I had to blow it up on a separate monitor so I could actually see the color difference, because color correcting on this, when you have this tiny of a window to work with, this is a 10.9 inch iPad. It's an 11 inch iPad basically, and yet look how tiny this reference window is. You can hardly see it. So yeah, I spent quite a lot longer than I wanted to in terms of just color correcting the footage before I could even begin the editing process. After that, actually editing the audio clips was fairly simpler. You just tap the clip, you go into volume, and then you get this volume slider right here, which actually that was fairly simple. And unlike the color correction tools, it uses the same units as Final Cut for Mac. So yeah, I basically turned my vocal audios up to +7 decibels, and then my audio music background tracks to -25 decibels, and there we had it. We were all set to finally start slicing the footage, which was a way longer time-consuming process than I expected it to be. Something that I love about the Mac is all you have to do is hit the B key, and then your cursor instantly becomes, well, some call it the blade or the razor tool, depends on who you ask. I call it the slicer tool because I'm slicing and dicing my way through the footage as I cut out all my silence bits. Once that mouse becomes a cursor, all I have to do is click the edge of where there's audio and where there's not, and click, and that's how I cut my footage up, just like that. And it takes me like, how long? Depends on the footage, but usually takes me about a half hour to do my slicing and dicing, depending on the footage. Like, say if it's 10-minute long footage, it takes me about half an hour to slice and dice my way through it. Whew! Yeah, it took me like, I don't even think twice as long. I think it took me like 2.5 to 3 times as long to slice and dice through the Final Cut footage on the iPad. It was real slow, because basically the way you had to slice your footage, it was just, you had to drag the playhead to the exact spot you wanted, and then after you drag it there, you have to first select the clip. This is not the case in Final Cut as long as it's your primary A-roll. If it's B-roll, then you have to select the B-roll clip in order to actually slice it. But if you're cutting A-roll, which was what I do, this is what I do when I slice and dice my footage. I start off A-roll and then I add B-roll bits on top. But even if you just have A-roll, you still have to select the A-roll clip in order to actually slice it. That's adding a lot more time to the slicing process. And sure enough, it took me forever to get through that, because every single time I did it, I first had to drag the playhead to exactly where I wanted it, then I had to push the slice button on the iPad and such. So yeah, I spent way longer trying to slice and dice my footage. And initially with this video, I took a slightly different editing approach to my typical editing style. But the one dry video that I edited on the iPad, I did everything in my power to use the exact same style of editing like I do on the Mac. And oh, that was not fun. That was not. It took me hours to get through that. I actually think it took me 2 days to edit that video, despite that I could have edited it in 2 hours on the MacBook. So yeah, the simple slicing and dicing like I do in my typical videos, that was not an easy process. And then of course, the deleting process was just as fun. You had to go back and select every clip and then hit the delete button on the iPad so you can, well, get rid of the silence bits like I typically do. So yeah, it was just time consuming. That's a big issue that I have with Final Cut on the iPad. It's way more time consuming to do everything on the iPad than the Mac. And honestly, it does not have to be this way. If I could push a button in the menu to turn wherever I touch on the timeline, it instantly just slices the footage unless I drag it. That would have been so useful. That would have sped things up so much instead of having to select the clip, drag the playhead to where you want, and then hit the slice button. That could have saved so much time, and it's honestly simple design that I'm surprised Apple didn't even bother attempting to integrate. And sure, maybe I could have sped things up if I connected, say, my Magic Mouse to the iPad and used its cursor, but if I'm connecting a mouse to my iPad to edit video, then why not just get a Mac in the first place if you're going to use a mouse? So yeah, when I did edit those videos, I only used 2 different tools actually to edit with the iPad. I was using the iPad's touchscreen itself and the Apple Pencil, because out of all accessories that Apple makes for the iPad, actually this to me is the most logical accessory available to it. So yeah, that was my editing style with the iPad. It was basically using the touchscreen and the Apple Pencil to get hyper precise. So yeah, that was the most time consuming process process of it, the whole thing, that was just slowing me down so much. But there's other bits of the software that I just think Apple should have done a better job designing. It confuses me so much when Apple comes out with a product that is poorly designed, when Apple is the company famous for design. And yet, how do things like these happen? I don't get it. I'm genuinely confused, just like you. But the import process when it comes to video footage, it's not simple. I tried using a slide over window actually to drag clips from my Photos app and just drag it into my Final Cut library, but no, it doesn't really work like that. I mean, it worked sometimes, but no, most of the time you had to hit the import button and then you had to select, okay, you want to go through the photos. It was a longer process instead of a simple drag and drop like we can with Final Cut on the Mac. We have footage open in a Finder window. All we have to do is just select the bits we want and drag it into Final Cut. We don't even have to drag it into the library section in the Final Cut app. All you have to do is drag it to the timeline and boom, it is there. Why do you have to add more steps to this, Apple? This just makes no sense. Another thing about it that just doesn't make sense to me, where are the sound effects? Yeah, you heard me right. Where are the sound effects? Apple doesn't have a sound effects library for Final Cut on the iPad. I have searched. I have found nothing. Out of all audio tracks that they had 0 sound effects. Despite that, how many sound effects does Final Cut have? Oh, yeah, way more than iMovie for both the Mac and the iPad. And yet, Final Cut for iPad has less sound effects than iMovie on the iPad. That's a little concerning if I'm being honest, but yeah, there's no sound effects library available at all. So you want sound effects, you're going to have to create your own or look somewhere else to get them, because there's no default sound effects library available on the iPad, which to me makes absolutely 0 sense, because this is a more professional application than iMovie, and yet iMovie has sound effects and this doesn't? What? Also, I didn't test this out, but I've heard that other people who have tested this out with the iPad, hotkeys. There are so many hotkeys missing. For those of you who actually use a separate keyboard with your tablet, there's a lot of hotkeys that don't work. Like, for example, Command E, that's the famous export command on Final Cut for Mac. That does not exist for Final Cut on the iPad. And just things like these are throughout the rest of the application. It just does not seem very well thought out compared to the Mac application of it. Once again, the new professional application that Apple has released for the iPad, it's nerfed. It's not even all that useful. It's not that professional. And my last complaint about it is, why is it a subscription? Final Cut for the Mac is a one-time purchase, and it doesn't have to be $300. I got it via a $200 student bundle that also includes Logic Pro, Mainstage, Motion, and Compressor. Why is Final Cut a subscription for the iPad when genuinely it is one of the worst video editing applications I've ever used? I mean, okay, in terms of actually messing around with your footage, it is more capable than iMovie for the iPad. No sound effects library, everything's way slower, and this is supposed to be a professional grade application. I can't recommend anybody this application because it's not professional enough. You're getting a much more professional version of Final Cut with the Mac. So how is this working? I genuinely don't get it. So is the iPad Pro now because it has Final Cut? Nope, we're still waiting for actual professional grade software. I hate how they put such amazing hardware into the iPad, but basically give no software available to even take advantage of it. Apple just keeps treating their iPad division as a complete afterthought at this point. Like, it's getting features that iOS has had a year before it comes to the iPad. The professional grade software that's available for it is basically nerfed compared to the Mac, to the point where you're really just better off getting a MacBook Air and you're not going to lose all that much performance. I mean, iPads and Macs evidently have the same chip now, so what's the point? It's just making it really hard to recommend iPads at this point. I don't know how to do it. I mean, unless you're an artist who really wants to take advantage of the Apple Pencil, that's really the only reason why I can recommend iPads to people, but I just don't know how to do it at this point because Final Cut is not good enough on this thing, along with Swift Playgrounds and basically any other professional grade application. I mean, LumaFusion appears to be the best video editing alternative for the iPad, but but the fact that Apple's first-party option isn't as good as the third-party option, LumaFusion, I just don't know what to say. And like LumaFusion itself even has its own limitations. So I don't know what to tell you, but iPad Pros, they're not real pro devices. They're just expensive iPads. I can't even recommend them. I don't know how to recommend them other than to artists who love the Apple Pencil. That's it. Other than that, do not buy an iPad to edit videos because Final Cut is not what it should be on the iPad. If you want to do any video editing or even Photoshop, unless you absolutely need that Apple Pencil or programming and such, you guys really are just better off getting a Mac. I don't know how to tell you an iPad will do the trick. You're really just better off getting a Mac. All right, that's enough from me. Thank you for watching. Do me a favor and interact with the stuff below. My name is DeWolf, Random Alpha, signing out.